whether good or bad.
So good to see each of you out this morning under circumstances that are somewhat challenging. Frigid might be another word for that. Appreciate your presence, and especially those who are visiting with us and any who are watching online. We know we have a number who are doing that this morning, and it's so good to have you with us as well. When you are tempted and tried, as the song says that we just sang, and there have been many trials and afflictions associated with this virus, associated with the political shenanigans that have gone along with it. It's also important to appreciate our blessings that come our way. And sometimes when you're a little bit down, you appreciate assistance and you appreciate help even more. This is a loving congregation ready to reach out to help. And I want to announce something to you this morning. We had talked about our brethren in Kentucky who were so terribly devastated by the tornadoes that came through there several weeks ago. Much of that state and some other states that were also affected severely by them. We had actually planned to make a special contribution and send to them financial assistance. It would have been the fifth Sunday of this month that was scheduled for. We did receive word from the elders in the congregation that we're in contact with there in Madisonville, Kentucky, that there has been such an outpouring of support. They have received so much, just tractor and trailer loads and assistance and financial assistance. In fact, give an example, a father and son who did not live there in Madisonville, but owned some kind of business or commercial property there in Madisonville, had either sold it or converted their property in such a way, they said, we just wanted to do something to help. Here's $30,000. And that went into a bank account there at Madisonville where members had also been contributing to help those in need. This elder told us, thank you so much. We really don't need the assistance at this time. Appreciate you so much for being willing to help. But at the present time, our needs are met. They're overflowing, and they are so thankful. So we're not going to be doing that, sending that special contribution here as a congregation. But I did want to convey to you their thanks and heartfelt thanks for thinking of them during this time. And if things change, if the need arises, well, I will certainly be passing that information on. And I also want to say this to you as members here. I personally know of several who were saving up and planning to make that contribution on the fifth Sunday of this month. And you are to be commended for that. I think the Lord is blessing our brethren and He's blessing us here in ways that we cannot even begin to imagine. During my years of college and then graduate work after that, I took many final exams. I'm sure that many of you have taken final exams. You've probably taken many of them. Tristan had his finals at Freed-Hardeman just a few months or weeks ago, and he must have done fairly well because he did graduate. I have proof of that. I was actually watching the video and saw that occur, and I believe his parents were also present for that, so we're thankful for that. But you have to get through those final exams. Final exams to the college student can be a fearful thing, or to any serious student in academic pursuits. But you're familiar with preparing for an exam. I want to ask you this morning, all of us, this question: are we ready to stand before God on the day of judgment and take His, as it were, final exam? How do you prepare for a final exam? Some people prefer to review their notes. They sit down, maybe over and over. They will review their notes. They'll highlight portions of their notes. Sometimes I found it helpful to type up my notes or to prepare an outline of my notes to review for the test. Sometimes studying with friends is helpful. Some students prefer to sit down with a group and quiz one another and prepare in that fashion. Personal study, obviously, is very important. I have spent hours, some weeks, preparing for a particular test. Another very important preparation aspect is prayer. If you are facing a final exam, you want to pray about that. All of these, or maybe some combination of these, are techniques whereby people prepare for exams. Maybe you have also had to study for a professional exam, maybe an electronic exam or a radio exam or some professional milestone that you had to complete for that kind of training. You may have found some of these helpful. Wouldn't it be nice, folks, in preparing for a final exam, wouldn't it be nice if we could actually have a sneak peek at the exam itself? And I'm here to suggest to you in all seriousness that God has given us, as it were, a sneak peek at his final exam. In Matthew chapter 25, beginning at verse 31, it's as if the curtain of eternity is drawn aside and we are permitted to look upon the scenes that will transpire there on the day of judgment. And I would encourage you to get your Bible and open to that. Notice that. Matthew chapter 25, beginning at verse 31, which begins with these words, "But when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the angels with him, then shall he sit on the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all the nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as the shepherd separateth the sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left." With those words, he introduces this awesome scene of what it's going to be like on the day of judgment, giving us, as it were, a sneak peek at God's final exam. Aren't you interested in that? Let me, if you will, permit me now, go through with you some of these verses and notice a few of the things that we see at that time that are pointed out here. For example, we are told here in verse 31 that Jesus Christ will be the so-called grader of the exam. He is going to be the judge. Verse 31 says, "When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the angels with him, then shall he sit on the throne of his glory." You know, Jesus Christ is seated on the throne now. He is at the right hand of God. He is ruling and reigning in the hearts and lives of Christians. He's our king. But more than a king, he is also going to be on the throne of judgment. He's going to be the one grading the paper. Aren't you glad when you turned in those final exams that you had the confidence, at least I assume you did, I hope you did, that the person doing the grading would be a person of integrity, of honor, of honesty and trustworthiness? Many exams these days are graded by machine or by computer. They're graded through an automated process, but many exams are still graded by a single person who goes through and assigns a grade to the performance on that. Jesus Christ is going to be our judge. He's the one into whose hands we're going to commit our spirit. on the day of judgment. Here's another point from verses 32 and 33. There will be a separation. And I'd like you to notice, like we pointed out in class this morning in the last hour, there's not going to be any gray areas here. Did you ever argue with a teacher about gray areas? I have to confess, there were times where I had a discussion with a teacher or two about the way a question was worded. I thought I had answered it correctly. And to their credit, most good teachers would say, well, I'll hear you on that. I'll listen to you. Now, they may not always agree with you, but there were questions, because of the way they were worded, that left sometimes a gray area, and what we call some middle ground. That's not going to be the way it is on the day of judgment. Jesus says there, verse 32, before him shall be gathered all the nations. Now that's an inclusive word, all. Everybody's going to be there. This is one meeting that we will not miss. Incidentally, how do you like, under current technology, making your appointments for your doctor, keeping them maybe on your smartphone, maybe getting a text to remind you? Do you ever miss an appointment? I have missed appointments. I've missed doctor's appointments. Now, I feel badly when I miss an appointment. This is one appointment none of us is going to miss. All going to be there, all the nations. And he goes on and says, he shall separate them one from another, as the shepherd separateth the sheep from the goats. You know, I'm told that the shepherds of that day, and even to this very day, in certain eastern countries, by the way that they would herd and tend their flocks, could easily separate them at feeding time. That they would often bring the sheep into a fold or into a protected or enclosed area. And as the sheep would pass by, they could easily separate the sheep into the various pastures or places where they needed to go. I've seen farmers do that with cattle. In fact, we used to have to separate cattle for different reasons. Jim probably could tell us all about how that's done with cattle. But you know something? With sheep, it's even more on a large scale. Very impressive to see that done. And using their staff, they can actually just tap that sheep and tell them where to go and separate them. The sheep are separated, Jesus says, from the goats. You don't want the goats in with the sheep, and there's going to be a separation. And he shall separate them as the shepherd separateth the sheep from the goats, and he shall set the sheep on his right hand and the goats on the left. Are you saved, or are you lost? No middle ground on the day of judgment. I think our culture needs to know that lesson, needs to think about that seriously, because we're used to living in a situation where there seems to always be room for argument on every issue. I mean, every issue from the politics through the medical issues, right down to the local level. There seems to be so many gray areas. That's not the way it's going to be on the day of judgment. We need to make sure, folks, that we are saved, because there's going to be a culling out at that time. Thirdly, these rewards are well thought out. Notice the wording there at verse 34. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from whence? The foundation of the world. This is another point that was made in the Bible class last hour. These rewards, this salvation, is not something that's being invented at the last minute. It's not something that's just to be sort of figured out as we go. God has this all planned. This was prepared for the righteous before the foundation of the world, before this world was ever formed. These rewards are well thought out in advance. And then also, credit will be given for certain things. Notice beginning at verse 35. I was hungry, and you gave me to eat. That's verse 35a. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. Verse 36, the first part says, naked, and you clothed me. You see how the importance of caring for the needy and feeding or clothing the hungry. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but have you ever really been hungry? Remember years ago, the congregation where I was a member decided to fast before the appointment of elders. It was a voluntary thing. And some of us went without food for a period of time. Have you ever done that? Some of you have. Do you know what it's like to be hungry? But even though we were fasting, we knew we could break this fast. There was food in the kitchen, in the refrigerator, in the cabinet. If necessary, we could drive down to the restaurant and get a dinner to eat. But you know, there are people living in hunger that cannot break that fast. They're miserable. I don't know about you, but by about 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, if I haven't eaten, I get miserable. I get a headache. I can get physically sick. You would think that the world was coming to an end because I hadn't eaten breakfast or lunch that day. There are people who haven't enjoyed a good meal in weeks, months. The pain of hunger. Do you care about that? Jesus says, I was hungry. He gave me something to eat. Years ago, up here at the lectureships that used to be conducted in eastern Pennsylvania, Marvina and I went up there one time to hear Brother Tom Holland speak. He flew in and had missed a meal, or maybe missed a couple of meals, and he was to speak that evening, and there wasn't time to eat before he spoke. We got together with him right after the evening service and took him to a nearby McDonald's, and he said, Bob, I got to tell you, I'm not feeling well. I thought he was going to get sick on us right on the spot. But he sat down at that McDonald's, and I believe he ordered something like chicken McNuggets, and he ate 2 or 3 of them, and he said, you know what? I'm feeling a lot better. I was really feeling sick, hungry. Sometimes just eating a little bit really gets us over the hump. Well, Jesus says, I was hungry. You know something? You took me to McDonald's. You gave me something to eat right when I needed it. And I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. By the way, there have been some times putting hay in the barn in the summertime, long about end of May or June, where I have been thirsty. And I saw Marvina or one of the kids come out of the house with some water or something really cold to drink. And let me tell you, I appreciated that. I really needed something to drink. Jesus says, you know, there was a time where I needed a drink. I was thirsty and you gave me to drink. Have you ever been underdressed out in the cold? Maybe you didn't have your coat. Today, when we got up this morning, it was 8 degrees outside. And I had to go out and load a wood furnace. But I had a nice warm coat to put on. What would it be like to be without clothing? To be naked? Jesus says, that's the way I was. You gave me clothing to put on. You see, credit for these things is given. Check, check, check. Look at the next one. Hospitality. Verse 35 in the latter part says, I was a stranger. Have you ever been a stranger? You know, I ask our members here at Central to think about this when we have visitors. It's easy when we have been at a place for a long time and we have our friends, we have those that we talk to, we sit the same place and we go through the same routine. It's easy to forget that when a stranger comes in our midst, he or she does not have an assigned seat, doesn't have a set place to sit. They have to kind of feel their way. They don't know anybody to talk to. They're a stranger. They don't have another family that they're going to go have dinner with after services at a local restaurant. If you go out of your way to look for strangers, people who just don't have a set place, and make them feel at home, make them feel welcome. Or maybe they are the wallflowers at the banquet or the get-together. I remember a lady in the church, fairly new Christian, had to go to a funeral that I was going to be preaching, and Marvina would be there with me. This lady said to me, Bob, would you and Marvina mind if I sit with you at the meal afterwards? I don't know any of these people. Do you know that feeling? Jesus says, that's the way I was. And you made me feel at home. Hospitality. Check that off. Here's the next one. There's going to be credit given for visiting the sick. Verse 36 in the latter part of the verse says, I was sick and you visited me. Now the word visited there suggests caring for. More than just stopping in and saying, hey, good to see you. It's the same word that James uses describing what pure and undefiled religion is in the sight of God, to visit the sick and the widows in their and orphans in their affliction, rather, widows and orphans. That word is the same word in concept as this. It means to care for them, to provide for them, to see to their needs. Jesus says there's going to be credit given for that. Can you think of anybody who is sick? How about this? Credit given for helping the persecuted. The latter part of verse 36 says, I was in prison, and you came unto me. Now let me share a thought with you about being in prison. This is coming from a former prosecutor. People in prison today in our country generally is not the same situation as it was in the first century. In the first century, I tell you who you would find if you visited in prison. You would find Christians. You would find persecuted people many times. Now, there were also criminals there. But our brethren have been persecuted and afflicted and imprisoned more years than they have been free. This is something we take for granted in this country. Because in this country, we think of prisoners as really bad people. And generally, that is a perception that is justified, in my opinion. That wasn't the case necessarily in the first century. Usually today, when somebody goes to prison, it's because they have done something bad and they've broken the law and they need to be in prison. But that wasn't the case then. I was a Christian. I was preaching the gospel and they put me in prison. And guess what you did? You came and visited me. That's what Jesus says. There's credit given for that. And the righteous then are going to discount their own merit. Look at verse 37 beginning. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee hungry, or fed thee, or athirst, and gave thee drink? And when saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? When saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? You know what they're doing there? They're downplaying their own actions, their own merit. You're complimenting us, Lord, but I don't remember doing that to you. You know, that's the way righteous people are. They do these good things, but they don't go around making a big deal out of it. And in fact, when they are complimented, they sometimes get a little uncomfortable with that. That's been my experience. That's the way it's going to be on the day of judgment. And then there's going to be a great clarification of values. Because Jesus is going to say something like this: Inasmuch as you did it unto one of these, my brethren, even these least, you did it unto me. And then the eyes are going to open. It's going to dawn upon people. Oh, that's what that means. Things are going to be clarified. Like in chapter 20 and verse 16, where Jesus says again that there's going to be a better perception of things at the end than there is right now. He says, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. Well, I thought it was best to be at the front of the line. I thought the ones who were the most ruthless and assertive and the loud and the dominant ones, I thought they were the best. Jesus says, no, it's that little old lady there in the back waiting at the end of the line. The last shall be first, and the first last. A great clarification of the way things really are. Inasmuch as you did it unto one of these least, my brethren, you did it unto me. Notice also on this final exam that there's going to be some points deducted for some things. If you look at verse 41 beginning, you see the text says, Then he shall also say to them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into the eternal fire, which is prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and ye did not give me to eat. I was thirsty, ye did not give me to drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me not in. Naked, and ye clothed me not. Sick and in prison, and ye visited me not. Points deducted there on God's final exam. Many who thought that they would fare quite well aren't going to fare so well on this test. Lord, when saw we thee hungry or athirst or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison, did not minister unto thee? Then he shall answer to them, saying, Verily I say unto thee, inasmuch as ye did it not unto one of these least, ye did it not unto me. I have watched people's faces change when their final exams were given back to them. I've watched people who thought they did really well on a test find out otherwise. That's not a good feeling. Folks, we need to make sure not only that we think we're going to do well, but that we actually do. And then the last point there, notice in verse 46 that the results of this test are final. These shall go away into eternal punishment, the righteous into eternal life. Could there be any more sobering verse in all of the Bible? Eternity is something hard for humans to get their minds around, hard to grasp the seriousness of that. If it were, a year of punishment in hell, We might say, well, I could tolerate that. I could do it for a year. I could stand that. It's not going to be for a year. Well, maybe 10 years. At least I would know there's some end to this. Notice, friends, that the same word that describes our heavenly eternal home also describes the duration of hell. The results of this test are final. Doesn't this put important significance on Paul's statement that was read for us a moment ago? Wherefore also we make it our aim to be well-pleasing unto him, for we must all be made manifest before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in the body according to what he hath done, whether it be good or bad. For 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 9 and 10. So let me ask you this question. Are you ready for God's final exam? Are you ready for the test? If not this morning, may I urge you to do what is necessary to get ready for this one. This one is the one that really counts. This test matters. If you're not ready, now is the time to make adjustment. Now is the time to prepare. If to become a Christian, you must do those things as outlined from the Scriptures on the screen before you. If we may assist you in your obedience, would you come while together we stand and sing?